Hello everyone, and welcome to another season of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the podcast where I, Gooey, rank all of the dungeons in the Legend of Zelda series. And this season has us exploring the land of Holodrum as we make our way through Oracle of Seasons. We're sent to this land by the Triforce to aid Impa, Princess Zelda's personal aide, on a quest. Our quest has us taking on the evil General Onox. Onox has imprisoned Din, the titular Oracle of Seasons, who was disguised as a dancer in a traveling troupe. Having captured Din, Onox causes the Temple of Seasons to sink to the ground, which results in Holodrum Seasons falling into disarray. After completing the tutorial mini-dungeon, Hero's Cave, we meet the Maku Tree, who sets us upon our true quest. We have to rescue Din and restore balance to the seasons. To do so, we must collect the essence of nature spread throughout the land, and the first one resides right within our first dungeon, the Gnarled Root Dungeon. The first thing many people note about this dungeon is that it actually is a throwback to the very first dungeon in the series, the Eagle from the original Legend of Zelda. I believe that this is because Capcom began their development on the Oracle games as a remake of the original Legend of Zelda, starting with the entrance and the location of the dungeon itself. We already see a striking resemblance, but from within, the shape of this dungeon's layout resembles that iconic eagle look. We also find some small details that are reminiscent of the Eagle or Legend of Zelda, like a mysterious old man who gives us a hint, and also the item in the dungeon is found in a similar looking location and manner to the bow in the original Legend of Zelda. We also find pretty much all the same enemies from the original dungeon present in this dungeon. They even made a slightly more unique boss battles out of the Goria enemies themselves, which is pretty neat. And that connective element to the original Legend of Zelda may actually be the most interesting thing about this dungeon. I don't necessarily mean that as a bad thing, but there's not much about this dungeon's theme or navigation that is fully moving the needle otherwise. From the aesthetic standpoint, I guess those references are its main kind of vibe, but you know, it's like dungeon theme isn't the most standout compared to what we've known in the last few games, but it's alright. Navigationally, the dungeon is solid for a starter dungeon. I do like, you know, that Link's Awakening style of dungeon design. It's kind of expanded upon here. You know, it's pretty straightforward. There's some nice backtracking and only very slight non-linearity. It's also got some nice optional chests with goodies in them. Gameplay wise, it's pretty basic, but the addition of like the minecarts is nice and it becomes a pretty solid feature in some dungeons going forward. Being able to hit a switch to change the tracks will create some unique navigational puzzling. The dungeon item of the Ember Seeds doesn't do a whole lot to change up the gameplay, but it acts as a nice logical progression gate in the dungeon. So all of this adds up to a pretty solid starter dungeon, but not necessarily the most memorable. With all the other similarities to the Eagle though, of course, this dungeon would not be complete without having that boss there, Aquamentus. He makes a return, and I'm always pretty excited to see this guy. I feel like he doesn't get enough love. That being said, this fight is very similar to the original Aquamentus fight, and pretty much as easy. It's not a bad challenge for a first-time player by any means. I like him. Defeating Aquamentus allows us to pick up our first essence of nature, the fertile soil. Seeds scattered across the bountiful lands are nourished in this fertile soil. So there we have it. I mean, pretty quick and easy. Obviously, I just got right into the dungeon there. There's a lot more that can be said about this game as a whole, and we'll get to this in ages with the next season, but I just want to, we're just going to gradually get into it here, because we're going to be doing a lot of dungeons here. I'm going to bring up the ranking, and I think you'll notice I skipped Hero's Cave, which is a nice little, you know, very linear tutorial, but it's fun enough. But I just didn't feel like putting it on here. It's less exciting than, you know, Candlelit Castle, which I didn't even put on here. So I know there's like, if you do a linked game, there's a optional, this Hero's Cave becomes an optional dungeon later, I believe. But I think I'm just, for now, I think I'm just gonna treat these as two separate games. And I'll probably play Ages Linked, just for fun, my own fun, but I think overall I might avoid the that bonus dungeon. We'll see though, because I think it changes slightly depending on which game you do it in because of the items, but I don't know. We'll cross that bridge in the next season, which will be linked. But I didn't know how to fully cover that because I didn't want to give one game more shine than the other necessarily. But as you noticed with my talking about this dungeon, it was kind of quick and dirty because it's, you know, it's alright. It's alright. It's a solid starter. Nothing wrong with that. Obviously it's much different than what, you know, Majora's Mask was going for, but that didn't even have a starter dungeon. But this is definitely, you know, comparable to, like, something like Tail Cave or even the Eagle, which, were, you know, solid starters within their own right in their own games. So I think I wanna look around there. Tail Cave I actually have pretty high, but I would put this below Tail Cave, so I'm already gonna nail it down to below that, and it's probably gonna go even lower. And then I'll say it's better than the Eagle, that's for sure too. So that gets us in, well, still quite a large range, honestly. It's helping to look at the first dungeons though. I do think it's slightly more interesting than Bottle Grotto and Eastern Palace. And, you know, even Dodongo's Cavern, just from a gameplay, you know, it's a little bit more fun poking around, though Dodongo's Cavern has a kind of more memorable vibe and cutscene, but I would say it kind of evens it out with the gameplay here. I think is a little bit more interesting. But I might stop it here and stop it around this area. Here's where I'm at. Better than Eastern Palace for sure. Not better than Desert Palace. So I've honed in my range here. This is getting really interesting trying to fit these in. I want to say, you know, it's not reinventing the wheel here, so it reminds me of Woodfall. I guess that had some more interesting gameplay elements with the Deku Link, so it's something to consider. It's kind of right alongside Woodfall Temple for me somewhere, in that it's not as mind-blowing. Maybe I'll put it below. I'll put it below that and Icona, I think, too, because Icona, not as complex, but still, I think, just some nice navigational puzzles, or sort of like the nice light puzzles. I'll give it that. And it can squeeze right above Jabu Jabu's belly, which I thought was a very interesting dungeon, but not executed to its fullest extent. This has a lot of that classic stuff of, like, well, you kind of find the map on your path, I think, but it's got a little bit of that sort of, like, you know, oh, what chest do I gotta open? What's legit? You know, is this bomb wall I gotta bomb type thing. Whereas Jabu Jabu's belly, I feel like those extra things are just kind of superfluous. Doesn't really have optional areas. So I think it sits nicely right in there. So we're kind of in the simplistic early dungeon range here, you know, with your other stuff like Eastern Palace, Bottle Grotto, Dodongo's Cavern, Woodfall, Desert Palace, Eastern Palace, you know, those type of guys. This one's not necessarily, it's laying the foundation for the rest of the game. I think it gets a little bit more interesting later. But I can see how someone would just not remember what anything sort of new or exciting about it, except for like the minecarts, which they do more interestingly later in the game. But it's a solid introduction to the game, to the dungeoning in the game, so I like it. I think I'm gonna stick with this placement. I'm pretty excited about it. I'm pretty excited to get to the rest of Seasons. So Thanks to everyone for hopping on to this season. It was fun doing Majora's Mask, and I'm excited to see how everyone's list compares to mine going forward. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next week.